I stood in the check-in line at Denver International Airport, clutching my duffel bag and trying to stop my hands from trembling. This trip was meant to be a small escape, a quiet break I hadn't given myself in years. I'd saved for it on my own, made every booking in secret, not even mentioning it to my family because I already knew how they'd react. Still, somehow, they found out. And the moment I stepped into the airport, everything began to fall apart. When I handed my passport and ticket to the woman behind the counter, she frowned at the screen, scanned again, and then looked at me apologetically. "I'm sorry, Miss Reyes," she said. "It looks like this ticket was canceled an hour ago." My heart skipped. "That can't be right," I said quickly. She turned the monitor toward me. "See? It was refunded online to a card ending in 4401. My stomach twisted. I knew that number by heart. It was my mother's card. I stepped away from the counter, fumbling for my phone. I hadn't told anyone about this flight, but last week my mother had called, nosy as ever, and I'd accidentally let it slip. Just a little trip, I'd said. A few days away, nothing big. That was all she needed to interfere. As I unlocked my phone, a message appeared on the screen. "Mom, have fun walking home, loser." I froze. The woman who raised me had canceled a flight I paid for myself, just to punish me for wanting some peace. The text wasn't even disguised with fake concern. It was pure spite. From where I stood, I could see a little boy in a Spider-Man hoodie stumble near the terminal window. His mother caught him before he fell, smiling as she brushed off his sleeve. I turned away quickly. Even that small gesture of care made something hollow ache inside me. In the airport restroom, I locked myself in a stall, sat down on the toilet lid, and let the tears fall. Not because the trip was ruined, but because after years of excuses, I finally saw it for what it was. This wasn't discipline or tough love, it was rejection. My parents didn't love me, not the way they loved Leah. Leah, their golden child. The dancer, the favorite, the one who got a car at 16 and designer clothes bought just because. She dropped out of college, but they still bought her a 3-bedroom condo and paid for her wedding. Meanwhile, I got long lectures about gratitude and used shoes from charity drives. When I finally stepped out of the bathroom, my eyes were still red. My phone buzzed again. "Dad, don't be dramatic." "Eliza, you can stay at Leah's if you're that desperate." Leah's, the Bansoir, same sister who once kicked me out into a snowstorm because her boyfriend didn't like having extra people around. The one who said I was born to be a background character. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I opened the rideshare app, trying to figure out if I even had enough left in my account to make it back across town. While I stood outside in the pickup lane, debating what to do, a small white car pulled up. It wasn't mine, but the driver leaned out the window and studied me with kind eyes. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you just got run over by bad news." I let out a shaky laugh. "Close. A text." He smiled gently. "Family trouble?" "Something like that," I admitted. "Hop in," he said. "I'm off the clock, but I'll get you wherever you need to go." I hesitated, just for a moment. But there was something in his face, something steady and soft, like the kind of kindness I hadn't seen in years. So I opened the door and climbed in. "Where to?" he asked. I almost said home, but the word stuck in my throat. "Nowhere," I said quietly. "Just drive for a while." He didn't question it. He simply nodded and pulled away from the curb, the city lights stretching out ahead of us. For the first time in years, I actually opened up. Not just polite small talk, real conversation. I told him everything, about my parents, about Leah, about how every achievement I ever fought for was either mocked, stolen, or ignored. The man, who later introduced himself as Harvey, didn't interrupt much. He simply listened, nodding quietly as the miles rolled by. After half an hour, he pulled the car into a small park and turned off the engine. "You know," he said, gazing out the windshield, "I've got a daughter. She reminds me a lot of you. Tougher than she realizes." That made me smile. "She's lucky to have you," I said softly. He chuckled, but the sound carried a hint of sadness. "She ran off to New York 5 years ago. Haven't heard a word since. I keep hoping she's all right." I met his eyes. "Something tells me she's more than all right." We sat in comfortable silence for a while before I reached for my phone. This time I didn't cry. Instead, I opened a folder buried deep in my files, one I hadn't looked at in months. The folder was titled Options. Inside were the blueprints of a life I'd been quietly constructing behind the scenes. Years earlier, back in college, I had taken a financial planning elective just to fill my schedule. I ended up loving it. After that, I juggled odd jobs, took unpaid internships, and worked endless double shifts. Slowly, I learned enough to start investing. Cautiously at first, then strategically. I never told anyone. Not my parents. Not my friends. To them, I was still the broke girl driving an old 2007 Corolla and renting a basement suite. They never realized the truth, that I had built a quiet empire in my own name. They didn't know that the landlord who once generously allowed them to skip 2 months rent during Leah's wedding was actually me. They had no idea that I was sitting on $78 million in assets, and they certainly didn't know that their cruel messages no longer had the power to hurt me. They were, in fact, liberating me, freeing me to finally respond on my own terms. I turned to Harvey with a faint smile. I think I'm finished being their daughter. He looked puzzled. What do you mean by that? I stared out the window. I think it's time I became their landlord. Then, without another word, I typed out the message that would change everything. Me, don't worry. Mom, I'll be home soon. The drive back toward the suburbs felt completely different this time. Not because of the air or the traffic, but because I was no longer returning as the family's scapegoat. I was going back as something entirely new. When Harvey stopped near my parents' street, I thanked him sincerely. He smiled, patting the dashboard. Go be the storm, Eliza, he said warmly. I walked the last block alone. The house looked exactly as I remembered. Beige siding, an overgrown lawn, Leah's white SUV gleaming in the driveway. It was the same house where I'd been yelled at, belittled, and kicked out 3 times before I turned 20. But now, it belonged to me. I unlocked the mailbox and pulled out a stack of letters, most addressed to Eliza Properties, LLC. The rent checks inside were all written out to me, including theirs. I followed the path to the door. I didn't bother knocking. I simply walked in. My mother looked up from the couch, frowning. What are you doing here? My father emerged from the kitchen, still chewing his sandwich. Thought we canceled your flight. Shouldn't you be sulking somewhere? Leah sat at the kitchen island, lazily filing her nails like some soap opera villain. Wow, she said with a smirk. Didn't think you'd recover that fast. Guess your pity party flight didn't crash after all. I set my bag down carefully and pulled a manila envelope from inside. Dad squinted. What's that supposed to be? Eviction notice, I said calmly, placing one copy on the counter, another on the fridge, and the last on the stairs. Mom scoffed. Excuse me? You're 3 months behind on rent under the lease you signed with Eliza Properties, LLC, which happens to be me, I said evenly. The agreement is terminated effective immediately. Dad's face turned crimson. You don't own this house. Oh, but I do, I replied, tapping the deed paper clipped inside the envelope. Bought through a private trust 2 years ago. I let you stay out of pity. But after today's message, the one where you called me a loser, I don't feel comfortable renting to tenants like that anymore. They both stared at me as if I'd spoken another language. Leah set down her nail file and laughed nervously. You're joking. I'm not. Then I pulled out my phone, opened a saved audio file, and pressed play. A familiar voice filled the room. Let's cancel her flight. Teach her a lesson about keeping secrets. She's always been ungrateful. My mother's voice hissed through the static. Running off on vacation while we're here struggling. Maybe she'll get stranded somewhere. Serves her right. Their voices were crystal clear on the cheap baby monitor I had tucked into my duffel bag the week before, during a brief visit. I knew they'd snoop through my things. That was exactly why I planted it. I wanted to hear what they said when they believed I was gone for good. When I hit play, my mother gasped, face pale. You spied on us? No, I said evenly. I recorded evidence of my property being occupied by emotionally abusive squatters. My father's tone turned sharp. You can't get away with this. I arched a brow. You sure about that? Because it's already done. Just then, my phone vibrated. A notification from the tenant portal. $1,470 received. Payment by Leah Baxter. Leah shot up from her chair. You told me the rent was delayed. Only if you hadn't laughed when I fell down the stairs last Christmas, I replied calmly. Remember? While I was holding your kids' presents? Her jaw tightened. You know what else I remember? I continued, stepping closer. Serving dinner to your children while mine sat on the floor because he wasn't considered a real cousin. Don't twist this, Eliza, she snapped. I'm not twisting anything, I said quietly. I'm just replaying it exactly as it happened. I turned and walked up the staircase. The walls were lined with photographs, all of Leah, not a single one of me. Every frame had been bought with my own money. I recognized the receipts from my old Amazon account they still used. In the guest room, once my childhood bedroom, I found a plastic storage bin shoved under the bed. Inside were my sketchbooks, honor ribbons, college acceptance letters, all stuffed together like junk. I took a photo for documentation, then carried the bin outside, emptied it into the trash can, and wheeled it to the curb. By the time I came back inside, Leah was whisper-screaming into her phone, probably to her husband. My father was making calls too, likely to a lawyer. None of it mattered. I had every piece of proof: leases, rent receipts, audio recordings, timestamps, bank statements, all lined up neatly long before this day. They just never realized who I really was because I'd never shown them her, the version of me that refused to be powerless. I'll give you 3 days, I said softly from the doorway. After that, the sheriff takes over. My mother's voice trembled. We raised you. No, I said calmly. You drained me dry and called it love. I'm finally done pretending that was ever true. I turned and left. On the ride back to my condo, the one overlooking the lake with a concierge downstairs and my name on every document, my phone buzzed again. Leah, you're evil, I smiled faintly. No, I thought. I'm just finished pretending I'm not. A week passed. 3 days came and went. Just as I'd promised, I filed the eviction with the sheriff's office. That Thursday morning, a deputy arrived with the paperwork in hand, delivering it in a calm, professional tone that left no room for argument. My parents stood frozen on the porch, faces drained of color. Leah wasn't there. She had packed up the night before, dragging her designer luggage down the driveway while cursing into her phone. Turns out, her husband hadn't known she emptied their shared account to cover the rent. He did now. As the movers cleared out the last of my parents' belongings, my mother turned toward me, tears spilling down her cheeks. Not from guilt, but from the shock that I had followed through. Eliza, we never meant to hurt you, she whispered. I looked at her neatly styled hair, at the designer scarf she once called a gift, the same one I bought her on a maxed-out credit card when I was 22. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You just never thought I'd be strong enough to push back. She reached out to take my hand, but I didn't offer it. Instead, I handed a sealed envelope to the sheriff. Please make sure this stays in the house, I told him. Inside was a photograph, me and my son smiling, happy, free. Beneath it, a single handwritten line. This is what a family looks like, not what you built. I turned and walked away without a glance back. Back to my real life, to my son, to the business and the home that I had earned, every inch of it mine, not out of revenge, but as proof. Proof that even after years of being treated like nothing, I became everything they said I couldn't, and as the door shut behind them forever, I knew one thing for certain. They would never mock my son again, not unless they were ready to beg for a meal.